Billionaire faked her own death to test her husband. Then this happened. The world knew Victoria Ashford as a $12 billion empire in heels, powerful, untouchable, unstoppable. But behind the gleaming glass towers and flawless public image, she was breaking. Her marriage had turned into polite silence, hollow routines, and a love she could no longer feel. So she did the unthinkable. She vanished. She staged a perfect death, a fiery crash, investigators fooled, the world mourning, all to answer one question. Did her husband ever truly love her? Or did he just love living in her world? But the moment she watched him fall apart, sobbing into her pillow, she realized something horrific. She may have destroyed the only real thing she had left. This is the story of the billionaire who faked her death, and the husband whose reaction changed everything. Before we begin, please, kindly subscribe to this channel, like, comment and share. I'll be so happy if this story touches hearts all over the world. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting golden rectangles across the Italian marble floors. Victoria Ashford stood at the window, her silk robe catching the light as she gazed down at the city below, a city where her name opened doors, commanded respect, and built empires. At 34, she was worth $12 billion, a self-made titan who had transformed her father's struggling real estate company into a global conglomerate that touched everything from technology to pharmaceuticals. But as she stood there, watching the tiny cars crawl through the streets 40 stories below, Victoria felt nothing but a hollowness that no amount of money could fill. Behind her, she could hear her husband Marcus moving through their bedroom, the familiar sounds of his morning routine, the soft padding of feet on carpet, the rustle of clothes, the splash of water in the bathroom. They had been married for 8 years, together for 10, and somewhere along the way, Victoria had lost track of whether what they had was real or just another transaction in a life built on transactions. Marcus appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his tailored suit, his dark hair still slightly damp from a shower. At 37, he remained as handsome as the day they'd met at a charity gala, his strong jawline and warm brown eyes still capable of making her heart skip, or at least, they used to. "You're up early," he said, his voice carrying that smooth, practiced tone that had once sounded like warmth but now felt like politeness. "Couldn't sleep," Victoria replied, not turning from the window. "Big day ahead. The Singapore deal closes this afternoon." "Right. The Singapore deal." Marcus walked to the coffee bar in the corner of their bedroom suite, pressing buttons on the espresso machine with the casual familiarity of routine. "Will you be home for dinner?" The question hung in the air between them, as hollow as every other conversation they'd had lately. Victoria knew the script. She would say probably not, he would say he understood, and they would continue this careful dance of two people sharing space but not lives. "Probably not," she said, right on cue. "I understand," Marcus replied, and Victoria closed her eyes against the wave of despair that washed over her. When had they become this? Two polite strangers living parallel lives in a palatial cage? She turned to face him, studying the man she had promised to love for the rest of her life. He stood there, sipping his espresso, scrolling through his phone, his attention already miles away. Once, she would have crossed the room, wrapped her arms around him, stolen a kiss that would have made them both late for work. Once, he would have looked at her like she was the most fascinating woman in the world, not just another item on his morning checklist. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, and for just a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes, a shadow of the man who had once written her love letters, who had proposed under the stars at a private beach, who had promised that her money would never matter between them. Yes. The question died on her lips. What could she even ask? "Do you still love me? Do you love me for me, or for what I can provide? Would you stay if everything disappeared tomorrow?" "Nothing. Have a good day." The shadow in his eyes vanished, replaced by that same polite distance. "You too." And then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hallway, the private elevator chiming as it carried him away to whatever his days consisted of now. Victoria had long since stopped asking. He sat on the board of several of her companies, attended meetings, gave opinions that were always intelligent and well-reasoned, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was just going through the motions, playing the role of devoted husband while his heart resided somewhere else entirely. The thought that had been growing in her mind for months now bloomed into full, terrifying clarity. What if the only way to know the truth was to take everything away? Victoria's office occupied the entire top floor of the Ashford Tower, a gleaming monument to her success that dominated the city skyline. Her assistant, Jennifer, had been with her for 6 years and knew her well enough to recognize the distant look in her boss's eyes as she arrived that morning. "Your 8 o'clock is here," Jennifer said, following Victoria into the expansive office with its panoramic views of the city. "The Singapore team is ready for the final review before closing, and you have 17 messages that need immediate attention." "Cancel everything," Victoria said quietly. Jennifer paused mid-stride, her tablet nearly slipping from her hands. "I'm sorry, what?" "Cancel everything. The Singapore deal, the meetings, all of it." "Victoria, the Singapore deal is worth $400 million. The contracts are ready to sign. If we don't close today, then we don't close." Victoria turned to face her assistant, and the intensity in her eyes made Jennifer take a step back. "I need you to do something for me, Jennifer. Something that cannot, under any circumstances, leave this room." "Of course. You know you can trust me." Victoria moved to her desk, pulling out a locked drawer and retrieving a folder she'd been building for the past 6 weeks. Inside were documents, plans, contingencies, everything she needed to disappear. "I'm going to fake my death," Victoria said, the words hanging in the air like a detonation. "And I need your help to do it." Jennifer's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Finally, she managed. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of test." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Victoria handed her the folder. "Inside, you'll find everything. Contact information for the people who will help stage the accident, financial arrangements, legal documents. I've thought of every detail." "But why? Victoria, you're one of the most successful women in the world. You have everything." "Doi?" The question came out sharper than Victoria intended, and she took a breath, softening her tone. "I have money, Jennifer. I have power and influence and more material possessions than I could use in 10 lifetimes. But I don't know if I have the one thing that matters. Your husband." Victoria nodded, sinking into her chair as the weight of her plan settled over her. "I need to know if Marcus loves me, really loves me. Not Victoria Ashford the billionaire, not the woman who can give him anything he wants, but me. Just me. And the only way to know that is to take away everything else." Jennifer slowly opened the folder, her eyes widening as she scanned the documents inside. "This is extensive. You've really thought this through." "I've done nothing but think about it for weeks. I can't live like this anymore, Jennifer. I can't spend the rest of my life wondering if I'm loved or just convenient, if I'm a wife or just a wallet. And if you're wrong, if Marcus does love you, and you put him through this." The question struck at the heart of Victoria's deepest fear. She had run scenarios, calculated risks, prepared for every eventuality except one, that she might destroy the very thing she was trying to save. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to him," Victoria said quietly. "But if I'm right, if he doesn't love me, then I need to know that too. Better to know now than to waste another decade in a beautiful lie." Jennifer closed the folder, her expression grave. "When?" 2 weeks. That gives me time to put all the pieces in place and say goodbye to this life, even if no one knows that's what I'm doing." "Victoria, I have to ask, have you considered that there might be other ways to find out how your husband feels? Counseling, maybe, or just talking to him?" "We've tried counseling. 3 different therapists, each one telling us we need to communicate better, to make time for each other, to reconnect." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "But how do you reconnect with someone who won't let you in? Marcus is pleasant, agreeable, supportive, and completely closed off. It's like living with a very sophisticated android programmed to be the perfect husband. Maybe he's depressed. Maybe he's struggling with something he can't talk about. Maybe. Or maybe he's just counting the days until I'm gone and he can inherit half of everything. The words tasted like poison, but Victoria forced herself to say them. I need to know, Jennifer. I need to know if the man I married is still in there somewhere, or if he left years ago and I was too busy building my empire to notice. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. Finally, she looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Okay. I'll help you. But Victoria, promise me something. What? Promise me that when this is over, whatever you discover, you'll choose yourself. Not revenge, not anger, not punishment. Just choose to be happy, whatever that looks like. Victoria felt her own eyes sting with tears. She hadn't cried in years. There was no time for tears when you were running a global empire, but the simple kindness in Jennifer's words cracked something open inside her. I promise, she whispered. And with that promise, Victoria Ashford set in motion a plan that would either save her marriage or destroy everything she thought she knew about love. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of secret meetings and carefully orchestrated preparations. Victoria met with Michael Chen, a former CIA operative who now specialized in helping people disappear. She worked with forensic experts to ensure the accident scene would be convincing. She made arrangements with her lawyers to have sealed documents delivered to Marcus after her death, documents that would provide for him financially while also protecting her assets until the truth came out. But the hardest part wasn't the logistics. It was saying goodbye to a life she'd spent a decade building, even if that goodbye was temporary. She walked through the halls of Ashford Tower, memorizing every detail. The way the afternoon light hit the glass, the hum of thousands of people working toward common goals, the weight of responsibility that had been her constant companion for so long. She had poured everything into this company, sacrificed sleep and health and relationships to make it succeed. And for what? So she could stand at the top of the world and feel completely alone? At home, she found herself studying Marcus with new eyes, searching for any sign of the love she desperately hoped to find. Sometimes she caught glimpses, a soft smile when he thought she wasn't looking, a hand that reached for hers during a rare dinner together, a kiss on her forehead before bed that felt almost tender. But then morning would come, and he would retreat back into his careful distance, and Victoria would wonder if she'd imagined those moments of warmth. 3 days before the planned accident, Victoria sat across from Marcus at dinner, a real dinner, for once, with candles and wine and the chef's famous risotto. She had cleared her schedule, told Jennifer to hold all calls, and asked Marcus if they could spend the evening together. He had agreed, of course. Marcus always agreed. That was part of the problem. This is nice, he said, raising his wine glass to her. We should do this more often. We should, Victoria agreed, though the words felt hollow. How many times had they said that? How many promises to make time for each other had evaporated in the face of board meetings and conference calls? You seem different lately, Marcus observed, his eyes studying her over the rim of his glass. Quieter. Is everything okay? Here was her chance. She could tell him the truth, could say that she was drowning in doubt and fear and desperate to know if their marriage was real. She could ask him directly, point blank, if he still loved her. But the words wouldn't come. Because what if he said yes? What if he looked her in the eye and told her of course he loved her, and she still didn't believe him? What if words weren't enough anymore? Just tired, she said instead. The Singapore deal has been demanding. You work too hard. It was something he'd said 1,000 times before, a refrain that had lost all meaning through repetition. Someone has to keep the empire running. You could delegate more. You have brilliant people working for you. I could. Victoria set down her fork, suddenly not hungry despite the exquisite meal. Marcus, if something happened to me. Don't. His voice was sharp, sharper than she'd heard it in years, and Victoria looked up in surprise. Marcus's face had gone pale, his knuckles white where they gripped his wine glass. "Don't talk like that. I'm just saying, if something did happen." "Nothing is going to happen. You're young and healthy and you're going to be here for another 50 years, making the rest of us look like underachievers." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Can we talk about something else?" Victoria wanted to push, wanted to ask why the thought of losing her affected him so much when he seemed so indifferent to having her. But she swallowed the questions, nodded, and let him change the subject to something safe and meaningless. That night, as she lay in bed listening to Marcus breathe beside her, Victoria made her final decision. She would go through with the plan. Whatever happened, whatever she discovered, at least she would know the truth. And the truth, no matter how painful, had to be better than this beautiful, agonizing uncertainty. The day of the accident dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for a tragedy. Victoria had scheduled a rare day off, telling her team she was taking a personal day to drive up the coast, something she used to do before the company consumed her life. Marcus had seemed surprised when she told him, had even offered to come with her, but she'd insisted she needed some time alone to think. "Be careful," he'd said as she left that morning, and for just a moment, his hand had lingered on hers, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart ache. "Come back to me." The words would haunt her later, but in the moment, Victoria had simply smiled, kissed him goodbye, and walked out the door. Michael Chen and his team had everything ready. The remote stretch of coastal highway, the carefully rigged car, the placement of the wreckage, everything designed to look like Victoria had lost control on a dangerous curve, her car plunging into the ocean below. "Last chance to back out," Michael said as they reviewed the plan one final time from a surveillance van parked a mile away. "Once we stage this, there's no undoing it. The media will be all over it, the authorities will investigate, and your husband will believe you're dead." Victoria's hands trembled as she removed her wedding ring, placing it in a small evidence bag that would be found at the scene. "I know. Do it." The next hours were a blur of orchestrated chaos. The car, a perfect replica of Victoria's, complete with her DNA and personal belongings, went over the cliff right on schedule. The explosion was controlled but spectacular, designed to leave enough wreckage to be convincing but not enough remains to be identifiable. From the surveillance van, Victoria watched as emergency services arrived, as news helicopters circled overhead, as the machinery of tragedy ground into motion. She watched, numb with shock at what she'd done, as the world began to process the death of Victoria Ashford, billionaire, philanthropist, businesswoman extraordinaire. But all she could think about was Marcus. Where was he right now? Had he been notified? What was his first thought when he heard the news? "We need to move," Michael said gently. "Your husband's security detail will have heard about the accident by now. In about 20 minutes, this whole area is going to be swarming with investigators, media, everyone." Victoria nodded, unable to speak. Michael's team had already prepared her new identity, Victoria Mills, a woman of modest means with a carefully constructed background that would allow her to move freely without being recognized. They'd cut her long dark hair short, added temporary colored contact lenses to change her distinctive green eyes to brown, and provided her with an entire wardrobe of ordinary clothes so different from her usual designer pieces. As she looked at herself in the mirror of the surveillance van's tiny bathroom, Victoria barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the polished, powerful billionaire. In her place was someone ordinary, unremarkable, exactly what she needed to be. "There's an apartment waiting for you downtown," Michael briefed her as they drove away from the scene. "Modest, anonymous, paid for in cash. You'll have access to funds, but nothing that can be traced back to you. We've installed cameras and listening devices in your former home and your husband's office. Everything you need to observe him without being detected. And my company's. Your will was clear. Everything goes into a trust to be managed by your board until your heir comes of age, which, since you have no children, means Marcus becomes the primary beneficiary after the mandatory waiting period. In the meantime, he inherits your personal assets, your properties, and he maintains his positions on all your boards. Victoria closed her eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what she'd done. In one day, she had erased herself from existence, had given Marcus everything he could have wanted, if what he wanted was her money. Now she would watch, and wait, and learn the truth. The apartment Michael Chen had secured for her was a far cry from the penthouse Victoria had called home. Located in a middle-class neighborhood on the other side of the city, the one-bedroom unit with its dated appliances and generic furniture represented everything Victoria's life wasn't: ordinary, anonymous, invisible. Perfect. She spent the first night sitting in the dark, unable to sleep, staring at the wall of monitors Michael's team had installed. Each screen showed a different view: their bedroom, the kitchen, Marcus's home office, the living room, even several angles of his office at Ashford Tower. The system was sophisticated, designed to be completely undetectable, and Victoria felt a wave of shame at the invasion of privacy even as she knew there was no other way. On the screens, she could see Marcus moving through their home like a ghost. He'd arrived back from the office around 7. She'd watched him get the call about her accident, watched him go white as death, watched him dismiss his entire day's schedule and rush home. Now he wandered from room to room, still in his suit, a glass of whiskey in his hand that he hadn't touched. Victoria's heart clenched as she watched him stop in the doorway of their bedroom, staring at the bed they'd shared for 8 years. Even through the grainy camera feed, she could see his hand shaking. He set down the whiskey glass on the dresser and picked up her pillow, burying his face in it. His shoulders began to shake, and Victoria realized with a jolt that he was crying, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to tear themselves from his chest. "No," she whispered to the empty apartment, her own tears streaming down her face. "No, Marcus, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." But she couldn't take it back. The news was everywhere. Every channel showed footage of the accident scene, aerial views of the wreckage being pulled from the ocean, samber-faced reporters recounting Victoria's rise from modest beginnings to the heights of global business. Her phone, her old phone, now sitting in pieces at the bottom of the ocean, had been flooded with calls and messages before its destruction. The business world was in shock. Stocks had already started to fluctuate. A memorial was being planned. And Marcus was crying into her pillow, alone in their bedroom, falling apart in a way she'd never seen him fall apart about anything. Victoria watched him until she couldn't anymore, until the guilt became too much and she had to turn off the monitors. She'd done this. She'd caused this pain, all because she needed to know if his love was real. What if she was about to discover she'd destroyed the very thing she'd been searching for? The funeral was held 1 week later, a massive affair attended by thousands. Victoria watched from a distance, hidden behind sunglasses and a hat, just another mourner in the crowd that had gathered outside the cathedral. She'd had to see it for herself, even though every moment felt like a knife to her heart. Marcus looked destroyed. That was the only word for it. He stood at the front of the cathedral in a black suit, his face pale and drawn, barely able to get through the eulogy. Victoria watched as he gripped the podium for support, his voice breaking as he spoke about their life together. She was everything, he said, his voice barely carrying across the crowd. Brilliant, driven, passionate about everything she did. She changed the world with her vision, but what people didn't see, what they couldn't know, was how she changed me. How she made me want to be better, do better, love better. His voice cracked on that last word, and Victoria saw him close his eyes, fighting for composure. I wasn't always good at showing it. I got comfortable, complacent. I let work and routine and fear of vulnerability create distance between us. And now she's gone, and I would give anything, everything, for one more chance to tell her that she was my whole world. That every day with her was a gift I took for granted until it was too late. Victoria's knees nearly buckled. Around her, people were crying openly, but she stood frozen, Marcus's words echoing through her mind. Was this real? Or was this the performance of a bereaved husband, playing the part expected of him? After the service, there was a reception at their penthouse. Victoria had to fight the urge to call it her penthouse, had to remember that as far as the world knew, She no longer existed. She couldn't attend, of course, but the cameras captured everything. Hundreds of people filled the space, offering condolences, sharing memories, celebrating her life. And Marcus stood in the center of it all, accepting sympathies with numb politeness, looking like he was barely holding himself together. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Victoria heard one board member say through the audio feed. Victoria was an extraordinary woman. "If there's anything we can do." "Thank you," Marcus replied, his voice hollow. "She was extraordinary. I just wish I'd told her that more often." Victoria watched him excuse himself from the gathering, retreating to his study, the one room she'd asked the cameras not to cover, a last concession to his privacy. She could see him enter on the hallway camera, could watch the door close behind him, but what happened inside remained a mystery. He stayed in there for 3 hours while the reception continued without him. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Victoria watched Marcus navigate his grief, observing every moment of his life through the monitors in her small apartment. She became intimately familiar with his routine, with the way he moved through the world in her absence. He stopped sleeping in their bedroom, choosing instead to spend his nights on the couch in the living room, the TV playing old movies on low volume. He went to work every day, maintaining his role on her company boards, but she could see the way he changed, the animation gone from his face, his participation in meetings perfunctory and distant. Victoria watched as he opened her closet one day, running his hands over her clothes, breathing in the scent of her perfume that still lingered there. She watched him sit at her desk, opening drawers full of her handwritten notes and half-finished sketches for new projects. She watched him break down in the shower, the water running over him as he pressed his forehead against the tile, his mouth open in a silent scream of grief. And slowly, against her will, Victoria began to believe that his pain was real. But then doubt would creep back in. Was he grieving her, or grieving the loss of the lifestyle she'd provided? Was he mourning his wife, or mourning his meal ticket? The cynical part of her that had built an empire by assuming the worst of people's motives wouldn't let her accept his grief at face value. She needed more evidence. She needed to see what he did when he thought no one was watching, how he spoke about her when there was no audience to perform for. The answer came 2 weeks after the funeral, when Marcus's best friend, David, came to visit. Victoria knew David well. He'd been Marcus's college roommate, had stood as best man at their wedding, and had remained a close friend through the years. She'd always liked him, appreciated his straightforward manner and his obvious care for Marcus. Now, watching through the cameras as David let himself into the penthouse with his spare key, Victoria leaned forward, her heart pounding. This could be it, the moment she learned the truth. "You look like hell," David said without preamble, setting down a bag of takeout on the kitchen counter. "When's the last time you ate?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied automatically, the same response he'd given to everyone who asked. "You're not fine. You're falling apart." David started unpacking the food, his movements brisk and practical. "I get it, Marcus. I know what Victoria meant to you. But you can't keep living like this, locked in this apartment, barely functioning." "She's been dead for 3 weeks, Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp. 3 weeks, David. Forgive me if I'm not ready to move on with my life. I'm not asking you to move on. I'm asking you to survive." David pushed a container of food across the counter toward Marcus. "Eat. Then talk to me. Really talk to me." For a long moment, Marcus just stared at the food. Then, slowly, he opened the container and took a bite, chewing mechanically. They ate in silence for a few minutes before David spoke again. "Do you want to know what I keep thinking about?" David asked quietly. "What?" "That last dinner we all had together. Remember? About 6 months ago, at that steakhouse downtown. Victoria was late because of some emergency board meeting, and you and I sat there waiting for her, having drinks, talking about nothing important." Marcus nodded, his expression distant. "I remember. And when she finally arrived, she was apologizing profusely, so stressed about keeping us waiting. And you know what you did." "David." You barely looked up from your phone. You said, "It's fine," and went right back to whatever email you were reading. And Victoria just deflated. I watched the light go out of her eyes, and she sat down and tried to enjoy the dinner, but it was like something had broken. Marcus had gone completely still, the fork frozen halfway to his mouth. "I should have said something then," David continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have pulled you aside and told you that you were losing her. Not to death, to indifference. That you were so wrapped up in your own world that you couldn't see she was drowning, desperate for you to notice her, to choose her, to show her that she mattered more than whatever was on your phone." "Stop." Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "I can't stop, Marcus. Because now she's gone, and I have to watch you destroy yourself with grief, and I can't help wondering if maybe, just maybe, some part of you is grieving the man you should have been instead of the man you were." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Victoria felt like she couldn't breathe, like David had reached through the camera and squeezed her heart in his fist. Marcus set down his fork, his hand shaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. "You're right." "Marcus." "No, you're right. About all of it." Marcus stood, pacing to the window, his back to David and the camera. "I was a terrible husband. I was selfish and distant, and I took her for granted every single day. I told myself I was supporting her, that by staying out of her way and letting her build her empire, I was being a good partner. But the truth was, I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of not being enough." Marcus turned, and Victoria could see tears streaming down his face. She was Victoria Ashford, for God's sake. She was brilliant and powerful, and she didn't need me for anything. I didn't build that empire, she did. I didn't have that vision or that drive or that talent. I was just the guy lucky enough to have fallen in love with her before she became who she was destined to be. "You think she cared about any of that?" David asked gently. "I don't know. That's the hell of it, David. I don't know, and now I never will. I never asked. I never pushed past the surface of what we'd become to find out if there was still something real underneath. I just existed alongside her, too afraid to risk vulnerability, too comfortable in the routine we'd fallen into." Marcus sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. "And now she's dead, and the last real conversation we had was about whether I'd be home for dinner. Not I love you, not you mean everything to me, not any of the 1,000 things I should have said every single day. Just whether I'd be home for dinner." Victoria watched through her tears as David sat beside his friend, putting an arm around his shoulders. "She knew you loved her, Marcus." "Did she?" Marcus looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "Because I'm not sure I ever really showed her. I said the word sometimes, went through the motions, but did I make her feel it? Did she know, deep in her bones, that I would have given up everything just to make her happy? That her money and her success meant nothing to me compared to just being with her? Is that true?" David asked quietly. "Would you have given it all up?" "In a heartbeat." Marcus's voice was fierce, certain. "I would have lived in a studio apartment eating ramen noodles if it meant I got to spend every evening talking to her. Really talking, the way we used to when we first met. I would have given up the cars and the penthouses and the luxury and the status, all of it, if it meant I got her back. Just her. Just Victoria." Victoria pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. This was what she'd needed to hear, what she'd risked everything to discover. But hearing it like this, knowing the pain she'd caused to extract this truth, felt like punishment rather than vindication. "But I can't tell her that now," Marcus continued, his voice breaking. "I can't tell her that every morning I wake up and the first thought in my head is that she's gone. I can't tell her that I would trade every moment of the comfortable life we built for 1 hour of the messy, imperfect, real relationship we used to have. I can't tell her that I'm sorry for being too proud and too scared to fight for us when we started drifting apart." He looked at David, his face a mask of anguish. I can't tell her that I loved her, really, truly, completely loved her, and that losing her has broken something in me that I don't think will ever be whole again. David pulled his friend into a hug as Marcus finally, fully broke down, his sobs echoing through the empty penthouse. And in her small apartment across the city, Victoria wept with him, the weight of her deception crushing her chest until she couldn't breathe. She had her answer. Marcus loved her. Not her money, not her status, not what she could provide, her. Just her. And she had made him think she was dead to discover it. The revelation should have been enough. Victoria had what she'd come for, proof that Marcus's love was real, that beneath the comfortable distance they'd fallen into, his heart had always belonged to her. She should have ended the charade, revealed herself, and begged for his forgiveness. But as the weeks stretched into a month, and then 2, Victoria found herself unable to take that final step. Because she'd discovered something unexpected in her surveillance of Marcus's life, she didn't know him at all. Or rather, she'd forgotten who he was. The man he'd been before their relationship had calcified into routine and comfortable silence. Watching him now, raw and vulnerable in his grief, she saw glimpses of the Marcus she'd fallen in love with. The man who stayed up until 3 in the morning writing in a journal he'd never shown her, pouring out his thoughts and feelings with an honesty that took her breath away. The man who volunteered at a youth center on Tuesday evenings, mentoring at-risk teenagers, something she'd never known he did. The man who visited his mother every Sunday, his mother, who lived in a modest assisted living facility across town, someone Victoria had met only a handful of times and had shamefully neglected to build a relationship with. How had she missed all of this? How had she been so consumed by her empire that she'd failed to see the full life her husband led beyond her periphery? The answer, she realized with growing shame, was that she'd stopped paying attention. She'd stopped asking questions, stopped showing interest in anything that didn't directly relate to her business or their shared logistics. She'd been so focused on wondering if Marcus loved her that she'd failed to ask herself if she was being a good wife to him. Victoria watched one Sunday as Marcus sat with his mother, Eleanor, in the sunny common room of her assisted living facility. Eleanor was 78, still sharp as a tack, with Marcus's same warm brown eyes and quick smile. "You look tired, sweetheart," Eleanor said, patting Marcus's hand. "Are you sleeping?" "Not much," Marcus admitted. He'd brought flowers, bright yellow sunflowers, his mother's favorites, and they sat in a vase between them, cheerful in contrast to the somber mood. "I miss her too, you know," Eleanor said gently. "Victoria was a wonderful woman. I know you two didn't visit as often as we would have liked, but I always felt her warmth when she called on my birthday, always appreciated the thought she put into the gift she sent." Victoria felt a pang of guilt. She had sent gifts, expensive, tasteful gifts selected by her assistant, but she hadn't visited. She'd been too busy, always too busy, to spend time with the woman who had raised the man she loved. "I failed her, Mom," Marcus said, his voice thick. "I failed her in ways I'm only starting to understand." "How so?" "I stopped trying. I stopped pursuing her, stopped courting her. I let our marriage become a checklist of obligations instead of a daily choice to love her actively, intentionally." Marcus stared at his hands. "I got comfortable, and comfort turned into complacency, and complacency killed whatever we had." "And if she were here right now?" Eleanor asked. "What would you say to her?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I would tell her that I'm sorry. That I see now how lonely she must have been, married to someone who was physically present but emotionally absent. I would tell her that I want to do better, be better, if she'd give me another chance." "Another chance at what, honey?" "She's gone." Another chance to be the husband she deserved. To be present and attentive and brave enough to be vulnerable with her. Marcus looked at his mother with tears in his eyes. "I would tell her that I choose her. Not the money or the lifestyle or the status, just her. I would tell her." Victoria sat in her small apartment, Marcus's words to his mother echoing through the speakers. For 2 months, she had watched, waited, and witnessed a truth more profound than she'd ever imagined possible. She had set out to test Marcus's love, but in the process, she discovered her own failures, her own blindness to the man she'd married. The monitors glowed in the darkness, showing Marcus leaving the assisted living facility, his shoulders hunched against the autumn wind. In a few hours, he would return to their empty penthouse, would pour himself a drink he wouldn't finish, would fall asleep on the couch while old movies played in the background. This had been his routine for 63 days now, every day a testament to grief that Victoria had caused. She couldn't do this anymore. The experiment was over. She had her answer, and it was time to face the consequences of what she'd done. Victoria picked up the burner phone Michael Chen had given her and dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. "I need to come back," she said without preamble. "I need to end this." "Are you sure?" Michael's voice was neutral, professional. "Once you reveal yourself, there's no going back. The media attention will be intense, and your husband will know what you did." "I know. But I can't let him suffer another day thinking I'm dead. Not when the truth is that I was selfish and cruel and I destroyed us both to satisfy my own insecurity." "When do you want to do this?" Victoria looked at the calendar on her phone. "Tomorrow. I want to do it tomorrow." After she hung up, Victoria spent the rest of the night planning exactly how she would reveal herself. Not to the media, that would come later, with carefully crafted statements and damage control. No, first she needed to face Marcus, to kneel before him if necessary and beg for forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. She looked one last time at the monitors, watching Marcus sleep fitfully on the couch, his face drawn even in rest. Tomorrow, she would either save their marriage or destroy it completely. There was no middle ground anymore, no comfortable distance to hide behind. Tomorrow, everything would change. Victoria spent the morning preparing herself, both physically and mentally. She washed out the temporary color from her hair, revealing her natural dark brown. She removed the colored contacts, blinking at her reflection, green eyes that Marcus used to say reminded him of spring. She dressed in simple clothes, nothing designer or ostentatious, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was different from the one who had staged her death 2 months ago. That Victoria had been desperate and frightened, willing to destroy everything to find truth. This Victoria was humbled, broken open by the pain she'd witnessed, and terrified of what came next. Jennifer was the only person she'd contacted besides Michael. Her assistant had cried when she heard Victoria's voice on the phone, relief and anger mixing in equal measure. "I should quit," Jennifer had said through her tears. "I should quit and never speak to you again for what you put me through, watching you on the news, knowing you were alive but unable to tell anyone." "I know," Victoria had replied. "I'm so sorry, Jennifer. I'm sorry for all of it." "Is it done? Did you find what you were looking for?" "Yes. And I found more than I bargained for." Now, standing outside the Ashford Tower at noon, Victoria took a deep breath. Marcus would be in his office. He always had lunch delivered on Mondays, working through the meal while reviewing reports. She had clearance to go up, of course, though the security team would be shocked to see her. She'd briefed them that morning through Michael, sworn them to secrecy for just a few more hours. The ride up the elevator felt endless. Victoria watched the numbers climb, each floor bringing her closer to the moment of truth. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands trembled. What if Marcus couldn't forgive her? What if this broke him completely? What if she'd been so focused on testing his love that she'd destroyed any chance they had at rebuilding? The elevator chimed. The doors opened. And Victoria stepped out into the hallway that led to Marcus's office. His assistant's desk was empty. Lunch break. The universe giving her a moment of privacy for what came next. Victoria walked to his door, her hand hovering over the handle. Through the frosted glass, she could see his silhouette, sitting at his desk, head bent over paperwork. She knocked. Softly. Once. "Come in," Marcus called, his voice distracted. Victoria opened the door and stepped inside, closing it behind her. For a moment, Marcus didn't look up, too focused on the document in front of him. Victoria stood there, memorizing him, the curve of his jaw, the grey threading through his dark hair that hadn't been there 2 months ago, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless grief. "Can I help you with something?" Marcus asked, still not looking up.
Marcus, Victoria whispered.
He froze. The pen in his hand stopped moving. Slowly, so slowly, he lifted his head, and their eyes met across the room. The pen fell from his fingers, clattering on the desk. All color drained from Marcus's face. He stood up so fast his chair rolled backward, slamming into the credenza behind him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no sound came out. "It's me," Victoria said, tears already streaming down her face.
"I'm alive."
"I'm so sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry." "This isn't real," Marcus breathed, his voice shaking. "You're not real. I'm dreaming, or I'm having a breakdown, or—" He moved around the desk, stumbling, his hand reaching out. Victoria met him halfway, and when his fingers touched her face, tentative, disbelieving, she saw the exact moment reality crashed over him.
"Victoria."
His voice broke on her name, and then he was pulling her into his arms, crushing her against his chest with a desperation that stole her breath. His whole body was shaking, great tremors running through him as he held her like she might disappear if he let go. "You're alive," he gasped against her hair. "You're alive, you're alive, oh God, you're alive." "I'm alive," Victoria confirmed, her own arms tight around him, feeling his heart racing against her chest. "I'm here. I'm real. I'm sorry." They stood like that for what felt like hours, Marcus holding her while he shook apart, while he breathed her in, while he ran his hands over her back and shoulders and face as if to convince himself she was solid and warm and real. Victoria felt his tears in her hair, felt the dampness where her own tears soaked his shirt, felt the magnitude of what she'd done settling over them both. Finally, Marcus pulled back enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. His eyes searched hers, those warm brown eyes she'd fallen in love with 10 years ago, and she watched as disbelief transformed into joy, and then, slowly, into confusion. "I don't understand," he said. "The accident. The wreckage. Your ring was found. They said," his voice caught. "They said you were dead." "I know. Marcus, I need you to sit down. I need to explain everything, and it's going to be hard to hear, and you're going to be angry, and you have every right to never forgive me, but please, please let me explain." Something in her tone must have warned him. Marcus's expression shifted, confusion giving way to wariness. He didn't let go of her. His hand stayed on her shoulders as if he was afraid she'd vanish, but he stepped back slightly, putting a small distance between them. "What did you do, Victoria?" So she told him. Everything. She told him about the months of doubt, about the distance she felt growing between them, about her desperate need to know if his love was real. She told him about the planning, about Michael Chen and the staged accident, about the cameras and the surveillance. She told him about watching him grieve, about hearing his conversation with David and with his mother, about discovering all the parts of his life she'd never known existed. With each word, Victoria watched Marcus's face change. The joy of seeing her alive faded, replaced by shock, then hurt, then something that looked like betrayal carved deep into his features. When she finished, silence fell between them like a wall. Marcus had dropped his hands from her shoulders and now stood with his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on some point past her shoulder. "You let me think you were dead," he said finally, his voice frighteningly calm. "For 2 months, you let me believe I'd lost you. You let me grieve. You let me fall apart. You watched me cry into your pillow and break down in the shower and tell David that I'd failed you, and you just watched. Marcus, do you have any idea what these last 2 months have been like?" His voice was rising now, the calm cracking to reveal fury underneath. "Do you have any concept of what it does to a person, to lose the one they love and have no chance to say goodbye? To be haunted by every moment you could have done better, said something kinder, been more present. I know, and I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Marcus laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. You're sorry? You put me through hell because what? Because you didn't trust that I loved you? Because instead of talking to me like an adult, like a partner, you decided to fake your own death and spy on me. I know how it sounds. Do you? Marcus turned away from her, his hands in his hair.
God, Victoria.
I thought I knew you. I thought I understood you. But this? This is cruel. This is manipulative. This is... He turned back to her, and the pain in his eyes nearly brought her to her knees. This is exactly the kind of thing I would have expected from one of the ruthless business people you compete with, not from my wife. Each word landed like a physical blow. Victoria felt herself shrinking under the weight of his accusation, felt the truth of what she'd done settling like stones in her stomach. You're right, she whispered. You're absolutely right. There's no excuse for what I did. I was selfish and cruel, and I let my own insecurities justify something unforgivable. Insecurities? Marcus shook his head. You're Victoria Ashford. You built a $12 billion empire from almost nothing. You command rooms full of men who would kill for a fraction of your success. You've never been insecure a day in your life. That's not true. Victoria's voice was stronger now. I've been insecure every single day of our marriage. Insecure that you only stayed for the money. Insecure that I wasn't enough for you. That all my success couldn't make up for the fact that I was boring and unavailable and too focused on work. Insecure that the distance between us meant you'd stop loving me, if you ever really had. So instead of asking me, you decided to torture me. Yes. The admission cost her, but she forced it out. Yes, that's exactly what I did. And I was wrong. I should have trusted you. I should have been brave enough to be vulnerable with you, to risk rejection by asking directly if you still loved me. Instead, I did something cowardly and unforgivable, and I don't expect you to understand or forgive me. I just needed you to know the truth. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. What did you see? In all your surveillance, what did you discover? Victoria met his eyes. That you loved me. That you'd always loved me, even when I couldn't see it. That you were just as lost in our marriage as I was, just as scared of being vulnerable, just as trapped in the comfortable distance we'd created. And was it worth it? The question was quiet, but edged with something dangerous. Was discovering that I loved you worth putting me through 2 months of hell?
No.
Victoria's voice broke. No, Marcus, it wasn't. Because I also discovered that I didn't know you at all. That while I was busy building my empire, you were building a life I never bothered to ask about. You volunteer with kids. You visit your mother every Sunday. You write in a journal every night, pouring out thoughts you never shared with me. And I realized that the distance between us wasn't just your fault, it was mine too. Maybe more mine than yours, because I was so consumed by my own world that I stopped seeing you as a person with your own complex inner life. Marcus's expression flickered, surprise, maybe, or a flash of vulnerability quickly masked. I found something else too, Victoria continued. I found out that you would have given up everything for me. The money, the status, the comfortable life, all of it. You told David you'd live in a studio apartment eating ramen noodles if it meant you got me back. And that's when I realized what a horrible mistake I'd made. Because I'd risked the one real thing in my life to test its authenticity, and in doing so, I nearly destroyed it completely. The silence that followed was different. Softer. Marcus's arms uncrossed, his rigid posture easing slightly. He looked at Victoria, really looked at her, and she saw a war playing out behind his eyes. Anger and hurt battling against love and relief. The need to push her away fighting the need to pull her close. I don't know if I can forgive you, Marcus said finally, his voice raw. Not right now. Maybe not for a long time. What you did was... I don't even have words for how wrong it was. I know. But I also can't deny that I'm grateful you're alive. That even though I'm furious and hurt and betrayed, part of me is just relieved. Grateful beyond measure that you're standing here, that you're breathing, that I get another chance to tell you all the things I should have said when I had you. Victoria felt hope bloom in her chest, fragile but real. What things? Marcus took a step toward her, then another, until they were close enough to touch but not quite touching. That I love you. Not because of your money or your success or what you can provide, but because of who you are. The brilliant, driven, sometimes infuriating woman who challenged me to be better from the moment we met. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face but not quite making contact, as if he was still afraid she might disappear. That I am sorry for becoming complacent. For letting fear of not being enough make me withdraw instead of fighting for us. For all the times I chose my phone over your company, chose comfort over connection. His hand finally landed on her cheek, and Victoria leaned into the touch, her eyes closing against fresh tears. And that if you're willing to put in the work, real work, hard work, the kind of work that requires us both to be vulnerable and honest and brave, then maybe we can rebuild something better than what we had. Not the comfortable distance of before, but something real and messy and true. Victoria opened her eyes, looking into his. I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. I'll step back from work,
No.
Marcus's voice was firm. I don't want you to stop being who you are. Your drive, your ambition, that's part of what I love about you. But maybe we can find a way to build a life together instead of living parallel lives that occasionally intersect. Maybe we can choose each other, actively and daily, instead of assuming the commitment we made years ago is enough to sustain us. I want that, Victoria whispered. More than anything. Marcus pulled her close again, but this time it was different. Not the desperate clutch of someone afraid of losing what they just found, but the careful embrace of two people acknowledging both their love and their damage. This won't be easy, he said against her hair. I'm going to be angry for a while. There will be days when I look at you and remember what you put me through, and it will hurt all over again. I know. And I'll spend every one of those days trying to earn back your trust. And you'll have to tell the world you're alive. The media will be insane. People will have questions, will judge you, will. I don't care about any of that. Victoria pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Let them judge. Let them think what they want. The only person whose opinion matters to me is yours. Marcus studied her face, and she let him look, let him see all of her, the fear and hope and desperate love that had driven her to such extremes. Finally, he nodded. Okay. We'll figure this out together. But Victoria. His voice grew serious. No more tests. No more games. If you have doubts or fears or concerns, you come to me. You talk to me. You don't manipulate or scheme or try to control the situation. We are partners, or we are nothing. Partners, Victoria agreed. I promise. They stood there in his office, holding each other while the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be press conferences and explanations. There would be therapy and hard conversations and rebuilding trust piece by painful piece. Victoria would have to face the consequences of what she'd done, not just with Marcus, but with her company, her reputation, with everyone who had mourned her. But as she stood there in her husband's arms, feeling his heartbeat steady against her own, Victoria knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was real. Marcus's love was real. And their marriage, broken and battered as it was, still had a chance. I choose you, she whispered. Every day, for the rest of my life, I choose you. Marcus pulled back just enough to kiss her, a kiss that tasted of salt and tears and second chances. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I choose you too, he said. Even though you're absolutely insane and what you did was unconscionable and we have a very long road ahead of us. Victoria laughed through her tears, the sound breaking something open in her chest. Especially because of all that. Especially because of all that. Marcus smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen in months. Welcome back, Victoria. Let's go home. And hand in hand, they walked out of the office and into the rest of their lives, uncertain, challenging, but finally, honestly, together. 6 months later, Victoria and Marcus sat on the balcony of a small cottage they'd rented in the countryside, far from the city and the empire and the endless demands of their former life. The scandal of her return had been brutal but brief. Victoria had been honest about her reasons, had accepted full responsibility, and had stepped back from her day-to-day role in her companies to focus on what mattered most. They'd spent the last 6 months in intensive therapy, both individual and couples, working through the damage they'd done to each other and themselves. It had been painful, exhausting, and absolutely necessary. Do you regret it? Marcus asked, his hand in hers as they watched the sun set over the hills. Every day, Victoria answered honestly. I regret the pain I caused you. But I don't regret the outcome. I don't regret finding my way back to you, even though the path I took was wrong. Marcus squeezed her hand. I think I'm finally ready to forgive you. Not forget. I don't think I'll ever forget, but forgive. Victoria turned to him, tears in her eyes. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. Maybe. But it's what love does. Marcus smiled. It forgives. It rebuilds. It chooses to believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, two people who had nearly lost everything discovering that the most valuable thing they possessed wasn't money or power or success. It was each other. Imperfect, damaged, but finally, blessedly real. And that was worth more than all the billions in the world. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more life-changing stories. Your support helps us continue creating life-changing narratives.